All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I am glad to be able to be with you this morning and talk about this subject. So the PowerPoint says the text of the Minor Prophets, and I am going to talk to you about the text of the Minor Prophets. But the assigned topic is not the text of the Minor Prophets. I'm supposed to unmute myself. Yeah, just like old times. Let's see. So the assigned topic, I don't remember exactly what the words were, but it's something like, do we read the Minor Prophets as one book or as 12 books? All right. Let's see. How many of y'all knew that that was a thing that people like to talk about? Okay. I'm only seeing like 4 hands, but I mean, I heard a lot of laughing, so I'm not. So maybe the laughing is a yes. I don't know. I will go ahead and give away the end for me. Well, I don't know. One book or 12? I'm not real sure. It doesn't seem to me that it's that big of a deal. But I think it's an interesting question. I think the question is really interesting. How do we make such determinations? What difference might it make to us? And what sort of evidence can we bring to bear? And that's where I'd say the text of the Minor Prophets is going to come into play. So, I think we can, even though at the end of this whole thing, I'm going to tell you, I don't really know whether we're supposed to read it as one book or 12, and I'm not sure it makes that big of a difference one way or the other, even though that is my conclusion. I think we'll be able to talk about some interesting things, maybe some things that'll be somewhat new to you, or at least I'll be able to show you some pictures that maybe you haven't seen before. All right, so what evidence is there one way or the other? Do you know how many books, if you asked a Jew today, how many books are in your Bible, what would their answer be? Not today. They wouldn't say 22 today. Now, if you asked Josephus, he would have said 22. But if you asked a Jew today...
18?
No. Oh. My student. This will be fun. All right, no, we're on a good start. Anybody? Other students of mine? No, not volunteering. 24. 24 is the answer. Books in the Jewish Bible, 24 books. Josephus and some ancient Jews and some Christians had 22. They counted 22. So maybe this is sort of new. Let's talk about that. This is my thing. We talk about the canon of Scripture. That's what I do. So I can go on for this for a long time. Let's see. How do we get 24? Do you know that the 24 books of the Jewish Bible are the same as the 39 in your Old Testament? All right, they are the same. Content is the same. Obviously, they count them differently and they arrange them in a different way. So 24, how do you get there? From 39, we're going to go down to 24, okay? So we're going to combine some books. Obviously, that's what we are going to do. What books are we going to combine? Not the wisdom literature. Samuel is going to become one book. Kings is going to become one book. Chronicles will become one book. Minor Prophets become one book, and there's one more hanging out there. Ezra, Nehemiah becomes one book, all right? And if you do all those, you crunch the numbers, you can go from 39 to 24, and it's exactly the same. Now, if we want to bring Josephus into it, I mean, unfortunately, Josephus did not tell us what books were in his Bible. He told us the number, there's 22 of them. He didn't tell us what they were. I have a pretty good guess, or I have a guess, and you can tell me whether or not you think it's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's pretty good. It's a pretty good guess. All right. And here's the guess. That Josephus did all the things we just said to go from 39 to 24, and Ruth with Judges, Lamentations with Jeremiah, And that's how you go from 24 to 22. All right. We do definitely know that there were ancient people who counted in that way. There's a church father named Origen who is explicit about that. That's how you get 22 books in your Old Testament, is that you make those calculations. All right. So the whole point of all that was to say, you ask a Jew today, how many books are in your Bible? They'll say 24. They've got the minor prophets there. They're just counting the minor prophets as a book. It counts as a book. And that goes back, it goes back pretty much as far as we can trace it. As far back as we have evidence, people were counting the minor prophets as a single book. All right, so already I mentioned Josephus. He didn't say that the minor prophets count as one book, but he did say there are 22 books in my Bible. You can't get 22 if you're counting the minor prophets as 12 books, right? It has to be the case that he was counting them as one book, unless he just didn't include the minor prophets in his Bible, and we could make an argument for that, but no, that's not the way it goes. There's some other guy, 4th Ezra. Do y'all know this book? There's a book called 4th Ezra. It's not in your Bible. I'll tell you what, it's in mine though. Because I turn right about here and I've got these books called the Apocrypha in my Bible. I've got a New Revised Standard Version with Apocrypha. And the very last book of the Apocrypha is, they call it 2nd Esdras, but it's the same thing as what I just called 4th Ezra. And if I turn to 4th Ezra chapter 14, and I'm going to read verse 44. So during the 40 days, 94 books were written, and when the 40 days were ended, the Most High spoke to me, saying, make public, here it is, the 24 books that you wrote first, and let the worthy and unworthy read them, but keep the 70 that were written last, in order to give them to the wise among your people. That is a super interesting passage in all kinds of ways, but one thing it tells us is 24 books. What are you supposed to do with these, Ezra? You're supposed to make them public. Now, he doesn't say these are the books of the Jewish canon, but that's what he's talking about. That's what he's talking about. All right, the books of the Jewish canon. 4th Ezra, you've got to bring this home. 4th Ezra is end of the 1st century AD, so a little bit after the time of Jesus. Contemporary of Josephus. All right, a contemporary of Josephus. Josephus is right at that time too. So you've got Josephus saying there are 22 books, 4th Ezra saying there are 24 books. It's just a matter of counting, but either way you count it, the minor prophets count as one. All right. Then you go to Christian sources. I've already mentioned Origen and Melito of Sardis, and we could name off. I've got a book on this. It's not sitting over there actually, but I've got a book on the canon lists of early Christians and how they counted the books. And, pretty much all of them count them 12, the minor prophets, they're one book. That's the way they enumerate them. The Dodecapropheton, the book of the 12. That Dodecapropheton is Greek for 12 prophets. Right? The book of the 12. This is the way they refer to it. Okay, and in fact, if you'll turn to Sirach 49, you can find, y'all don't have Sirach, do you? I've got Sirach right here. Sirach 49 verse 10 says, let's see. Well, this is in the section of, I don't know if any of y'all know anything about Sirach, but this is a section of Sirach. Sirach is that book that's also called Ecclesiasticus. Okay, it's the same thing. Early 2nd century BC. So like 180 BC is the date commonly given for this text. Written in Hebrew in Jerusalem. And he's going through, this is the section of Sirach called the Praise of the Fathers. And so he's just talking about how great like ancestors were. He mentions David and Hezekiah. And then he says in verse 8, I'm going to read to you, verse 10 is the important part. Okay, but I'm going to set it up. So verse 8, it was Ezekiel who saw the vision of glory, which God showed him above the chariot of the cherubim. For God also mentioned Job, who held fast to all the ways of justice. All right, so we've got Ezekiel, we've got Job. These are great guys of the past. We should learn from them. And then he says, Sirach 49, verse 10, may the bones of the 12 prophets send forth new life from where they lie, for they comforted the people of Jacob and delivered them with confident hope. So he doesn't name off those 12 prophets, but, I think if we put two and two together, we can make a pretty good guess. He's talking about the minor prophets. That's what it is. I don't know anybody, to be honest. I mean, maybe you can find somebody. I don't know anybody who would disagree with that when Sirach 49 verse 10 says bones of the 12 prophets, that he's talking about the minor prophets there. And already in the early 2nd century BC, they are being considered as sort of a unity, a group together. You don't think about them as Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum. You think of them as they're the 12. They go together. All right, so it's this kind of evidence that, and we're going to see some more here in just a minute when we look at what do the manuscripts look like? What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? I think that, it's interesting to me anyway. But this is the kind of evidence that makes people, like modern scholars, think, well, I wonder if there's anything to that. Like, all of these ancient sources have this sort of unified idea that we ought to be thinking about the book of the 12 and not these 12 minor prophets. Does that have some sort of bearing on the way we interpret the books? Might they have been intentionally put together as this unit so that we do start from Hosea and read all the way through Malachi, and that's a better, more faithful way of reading these books than simply reading Hosea by itself and then reading Joel by itself? So anyway, that is what has motivated people to do this, and people have been doing this for a few decades by now. This idea within scholarship that you ought to read the minor prophets as one book, the book of the 12, started, sometime like in the 80s, 1980s. Like, as far as I can tell, people before that didn't really give it much thought. But starting in about the 1980s, people started thinking this way. And then really in the 1990s, people made big arguments, published books on this, and pushed scholarship toward thinking about it in these ways. There's disagreement, of course. If you know anything about scholarship, that's what they get paid to do, But definitely everybody recognizes that this is something to be thought about, that you need to think through it. All right. Let's see. Actually, I'll go, before I get to the PowerPoint, I'll mention, when did people start thinking about them as separate? The earliest evidence for that is this fellow you've probably heard of named Augustine. So this is, when would he have done this? In the early 5th century, I guess. I can give you the references. Let me see where I have those references. Let's see. Augustine in the, he has a book called On Christian Doctrine or On Christian Teaching, okay? This is where he counts them as 12. Augustine is the first guy we know on record who counted up the books of the Old Testament. And he's not the first guy to count the books of the Old Testament. He's the first guy who counted the books of the Old Testament and, as a part of that, counted the minor prophets separately as 12. And so he did that in his book On Christian Teaching, Book 2, and there are different ways of numbering that book. But I'm going to give you this reference. Book 2, Section 13. So you should be able to find it with that. Augustine actually says he's got 44 books in his Old Testament, which of course he's including the Apocrypha in the Old Testament. So that's part of how he gets to the number 44. But also the minor prophets all count separately. They count as 12. Okay, and he is also the guy who first attests the term minor prophets. This is in his book called City of God, and it's book 18, chapter 29. And there I'll read you the quote. He says, "The prophet Isaiah is not in the book of the 12 prophets who are called minor, because their discourses are brief in comparison with those called major, because of the length of the volumes which they composed." All right, so minor prophets, first attested there in Augustine, City of God. Okay, so let's take a look at some manuscripts. Let's see, if you, the standard text of the minor prophets in Hebrew is going to be the Masoretic text. All right, this is a text of the Hebrew Bible from about 1,000 years ago. We have these manuscripts about 1,000 years ago. So we would probably think of that as sort of late. Look, it is what it is, right? Our earliest complete copies of the Hebrew Bible are from about 1,000 years ago. Our earliest complete copy of the Hebrew Bible is, in fact, that third thing down. It's called the Leningrad Codex. You can view it on archive.org if you know what you're doing. But the Leningrad Codex, it's from about the year 1009 AD. Okay? Let's see. And another really famous codex is the Aleppo Codex. That's right above it. It's from about 100 years earlier, 925 AD. It is not quite complete, so that's why it doesn't get that label, earliest complete copy. And then there's also the Cairo Codex. Now, the reason for showing you these, and we're going to take a look at just a second, is to show how do these group these books together? The minor prophets we're talking about. What do the minor prophets look like in these things? And so, yeah, go ahead and go to, I don't think I can control it at all. So let me show you, let's see, okay, so this is the Aleppo Codex from, again, 925 AD. This is the end of Ezekiel and the beginning of Hosea. So, you know Hebrew, you read from right to left, right? So you got to start over here. This is Ezekiel, and then this is Ezekiel, and then Ezekiel, you can see, ends at about, the third line up there. Y'all see that? And then right below that, let me see if I can do this. This is Hosea here. This is Ezekiel. And then here you've got, in smaller Hebrew letters, you've got these notes that are supplied by the Masoretes, these scribes, right there. And the notes say there are this many verses in the book of Ezekiel. All right, the Masoretic scribe is going to tell us that at the end of every book of the Bible, the Masoretic scribe writes a little note. Here's how many verses are in this book. Why would they do such a thing? Why would we care?
In case you lost a page.
Yes, right. Maybe you messed up. Maybe, yeah, you lost a page. Something happened there. So if you know, I've got, I don't know how many it is. I'm not going to try right now, but let's say 1,500 verses in the book of Ezekiel from which I copied. This one had 1,500 verses. The copy I made, let me go back and count. I've got 1,498 verses. I messed up somewhere. I need to go fix that, right? It's a way of ensuring the fidelity of the text. Make sure you did a good job as a scribe, all right? So the point right now, these Masoretic notes, where do they come? At the end of a biblical book. That's where they come. All right, go to the next, will you? Okay, same thing in Leningrad Codex. Go to the next one. Okay, now we're in the Minor Prophets, in the Aleppo Codex, and so we've got the end of Hosea and the beginning of Joel. Okay, so we're reading right to left. So here's Hosea, and here's Hosea, and then here's Hosea, and then here's Joel, right here. And look, there's something right there, but it's not that note that we saw, right? And this is, well, I've already given it away, right? Displays bear number 197. So it's not the full note. That the point is, in these Masoretic manuscripts, when you get to the end of Hosea, you don't get the full note that you get at the end of a biblical book. You get this little, just a brief indication of the number of verses right there. So go to the next. It's the same thing in the Leningrad Codex. Keep going. So we're still not to the end. It's the same thing after Zechariah. So it's the same thing all the way through the Minor Prophets. You get this little indication, not the full note. Keep going, until you get to the very end of the Minor Prophets. And then you get your note. And there's the note. Here's the very end on this page of Malachi. And then you get your full note that there are 1,050 verses in the Minor Prophets. All right, so the point is, the Masoretic text, just by virtue of this, is treating the Minor Prophets as a book. Sort of, right? Sort of an unusual book. I mean, because you get the Masoretic note at the end of the biblical book. It's treating it that way. But, I mean, there's an acknowledgement all the way through that Hosea is different from Joel, right? And there's a little number there. And Joel is different from Amos. So it's sort of a part of the same book and sort of a different kind of thing. Do y'all see that? That the Masoretic scribes are treating the Minor Prophets in an unusual way. So in other words, I mean, you get to the end of Ezekiel chapter 1 and they don't give you a note on how many verses are in Ezekiel chapter 1, like they do at the end of Hosea. Okay? So they sort of acknowledge it's a separate thing, but then it's also a part of the same literary work, maybe? Same biblical book the whole way through. And that comes across, I don't think I have this in the slides, but that comes across in rabbinic literature as well. Let me read to you a little bit from Bava Batra. Maybe y'all have heard of Bava Batra. This is from the Talmud. So the Talmud is, let's say it's 600 AD. There's obviously debate about when exactly to date the Talmud, but let's say 600 AD. That'll give you a good idea, and definitely contains material from earlier times, but trying to date that material is like super hard. Okay, so this is Bava Batra. If you want to find this, you can find it online. There's this wonderful website with rabbinic literature called Sefaria, sefaria.org. I'll spell it for you in case, just in case. Sefaria. Sefaria is the name of the website. And you can find the Talmud in Hebrew and Aramaic, and then also in English. It's just fantastic. You can find anything. I mean, pretty much anything of rabbinic literature is on sefaria.org. The Mishnah, if you want to see the Mishnah, it's there. Okay, so this is from sefaria.org. This is Bava Batra 13b. The Gemara states, when different books are included in the same scroll, 4 empty lines of space should be left between each book of the Torah. All right, so we're giving rules for scribes. When you're copying down, when you get to the end of Genesis and you need to start Exodus, you got to leave 4 blank lines. That's the signal. I'm starting a new biblical book now. All right, and similarly, between one book of the prophets and another. So you get done with Isaiah and you need to start Jeremiah now. You got to leave 4 blank lines. But between each of the books of the 12 prophets, only 3 empty lines should be left. Because, the interpretation is because they are considered one book. And the scribe may finish a book at the bottom of one column and begin the next book at the top of the next column. Okay, so there you go. So the point of that is you leave 4 blank lines before each biblical book, but not between the minor prophets. You got to leave 3. So that's, again, it's an acknowledgement that they're different, but they're sort of still, they're not fully different biblical books. There's somewhat in between. Now I'm going to keep reading to you from Bava Batra. This is now from 14b. This is the famous canon list section of Bava Batra. So Bava Batra 14b, the sages taught, the order of the books of the prophets, when they are attached together, is as follows. All right, here are the prophets. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and the 12 prophets. All right. And then they get into a discussion about why is it that order? And let me tell you, what I just read to you is an order that's like not found in any manuscript. It's a weird order for the prophets, but where you start with Jeremiah and okay, strange. But then they get into this discussion. They say, what about Hosea and how it's first? All right, I'm going to skip that discussion. I'm going to go to the next discussion. Since his prophecy is written together with those of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi in one book of the 12 prophets, and Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were the last of the prophets, he is counted with them. And the Gemara says, but let the book of Hosea be written separately, right? If we're trying to get these things in historical order, why are you grouping Hosea with Malachi? Because Malachi is at the end of prophetic history and Hosea is way at the beginning. You got to separate them out. Write Hosea separately and group it with Isaiah, because that's the time period here. And here's what the answer is. Let's see. But let the book of Hosea be written separately and let it precede the others. And then the answer is, since it is small, it would be lost. Which, that cannot be the right answer, right? That is not why they wrote Hosea with the rest of the minor prophets. I am telling you that because it's true, even though there are scholars who think that is really the case. They just have to be wrong. That cannot be the right answer. Let me tell you why. Because Esther had its own scroll, right? Because Ruth had its own scroll. That's shorter than Hosea. It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to write Hosea with the rest of the 12, because it's short, why are you writing Ruth separately? Why would that get its own scroll? It doesn't make any sense, okay? So that can't be it. Here's what's happened. I feel like Monk. Here's what happened, right? I don't know if that, I've been watching Monk with my kids, so, all right. Here's what happened. The minor prophets, we've already seen, they were thought of together from the early 2nd century BC at least. This is something the rabbis inherited from previous centuries. They don't have any idea why Hosea is written on the same scroll with Malachi. They have the question. They have no idea what the right answer is. It's something they inherited from ages past, and they're just trying to come up with something. So it's short. That's why, right? And of course, it can't be the right answer. They probably knew that. They were just throwing something against the wall and seeing if it would stick. And inexplicably, for some scholars, it has stuck. But that has to be the wrong answer. But it shows that they are already sort of struggling with this. Why do we do this again? Why are these books all on the same scroll? But the very fact they're asking the question shows that it's something they feel like they can't really do anything. It's like, it's tradition, you know. Why do we have 2 songs in the prayer? I don't know. It's what we do, you know. Let's just keep doing it. And that's the way it is with the minor prophets and one scroll. It's just the way it has always been. Which again shows that it goes back a long way, and that tradition carries a lot of weight. All right, yeah, let's keep going. Okay, yeah, click the next, if you will. Okay, yeah, we can skip that one. Yeah, good enough. We'll go to the next one, Septuagint. Yeah, let's look at the Septuagint. All right, y'all know what the Septuagint is. I got a book on it if you need, right. But I don't have it here, I'm sorry. Although there's one copy, I just signed it. Let's see. The Septuagint's the Greek translation of the Old Testament. It was translated piecemeal. It started to be translated in the early 2nd century, but that's not the Minor Prophets. That's the Pentateuch. The early 3rd century, I should say. The early 3rd century, the Pentateuch was translated into Greek. The Minor Prophets, we don't know when, we don't know who, but to get a general time period, probably sometime in the 2nd century BC, it was translated. We don't know where. How many translators? Do I have it up there? Single. Yeah, that's the very first thing. All right. Probably a single translator. How would we know such a thing? Just by studying the translation and seeing, is there some consistency to this translation? So again, that's interesting, that early 2nd century, or sometime in the 2nd century, you've got a translator saying, should I translate the book of Hosea, or should I'm just going to translate the whole Minor Prophets as one thing. Okay, well that again suggests that this is being viewed as a unit. Okay, we can skip the rest of that unless y'all have any questions about it. But we'll go to now. What you should know about the Septuagint: if you get yourself a copy of the Septuagint today, the Minor Prophets are in a different order than what is in your Bible. Your Bible is, of course, a translation of the Masoretic text. Okay, I mean, if you have a normal English Bible, which I'm assuming you do. You can see here, the first 6, the last 6 of the Minor Prophets are the same. The sequence is the same. They both end with Malachi and all that. But the first 6 of the Minor Prophets, it's a bit different order. So people, of course, we don't know why. Why is there this different order? Usually it is assumed, and I have no reason to think this is wrong, that the order from the Masoretic, the Hebrew order that we have in the Hebrew text, is the earlier of the order, and the Greek order is an adjustment of that. I think that's probably right. I mean, I don't really know. I suspect that's right. All right, I'll put it in that way. I'll suspect that's correct. Why would I suspect that? We'll talk in just a minute, maybe if I don't waste all my time doing other things. We'll talk in a minute about catchwords between the books of the Minor Prophets. At the end of Hosea, this is one of the ways people try to make a big deal, and I think this is important, that the Minor Prophets are in the sequence that they are, that we have these catchwords at the end of Hosea and the beginning of Joel, that they sort of fit together, and we have these words that are common. And the easiest one to see, and I'll go ahead and give it away, is at the end of Joel and the beginning of Amos. Remember, the Lord roars from Zion. You remember that? It's at the end of Joel, and the exact same thing at the beginning of Amos. I think it's Joel 3:16 and Amos 1:2, I think is right. And you have the same exact phrasing. And it's unique. I mean, it's not like all the prophets were saying this kind of thing. It's at the end of Joel and it's at the beginning of Amos. And it's interesting, isn't it, that they go right together, so that if you're reading straight through, you get it twice, like within, 5 verses or something like that. So that's catchwords. I suspect that the Hebrew sequence of the Minor Prophets is the earlier and the Greek is the later because of the catchwords. I think that's good evidence, at least. The catchwords are easier to see in the Hebrew sequence as opposed to the Greek sequence. That's the point I'm making. All right. Why would somebody adjust it? What's the point? Again, there's going to be disagreement. I mean, we don't really know. But if you look at the Septuagint sequence, one of the things you see is the first 3 books are the big ones, right? And then you get the shorter ones. Why didn't they carry that through the whole way? I'm not really sure. But Hosea, Amos, and Micah, they're the bigger of the minor prophets. You see that? And what else do we know about Hosea, Amos, and Micah that might link them together? 8th century BC, yeah, they're all from the same time period. So maybe that went into it as well. Now, I think you would probably want to put Jonah in there as well. So you've got to think of why didn't they do that with Jonah? If that's the reason, why didn't Jonah get shoved up to the top also? I don't know. Because it's just a story about a prophet and it's not oracles from a prophet maybe. It is different. I mean, in the book of the 12, Jonah is definitely the odd man out, right? In terms of, it's not oracles at all. One oracle, yet 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown, right? So maybe that was the reason. Like I say, nobody really knows. I'm just, spitballing here. Not really. I'm feeding you scholarly guesses, scholarly spitballs, all right? These are very scholarly spitballs, which is what scholars tend to do. All right, so go to the next. What do we got? Okay, so what does it look like in a Greek manuscript? So this is Sinaiticus. Some of y'all have heard of this. This is a very famous. If Greek manuscripts are well known in your house, this is probably one of the ones that's well known. Codex Sinaiticus from the 4th century, one of the earliest full Bible Greek manuscripts that we have. It's from like I say, the 4th century. Let's give it a date of 350 AD. That is way too precise, but it'll give us a nice way to hang our hat. All right. So this is the transition, as you see, from Joel to Habakkuk. And so we have, when you look at these Greek manuscripts, at the end of the book is where you're looking for the name. So this is, of course, we're reading left to right now because it's Greek. So this is Joel, this is Habakkuk, and this is the name of the prophet, Yoel. Yoel. And then we have a delta down here, which just tells us it is the 4th in the sequence of the minor prophets. Right? So we're done with the 4th book of the minor prophets, called Yoel, and then we're going to start Abayu, I guess, is what that says. And man, I think that's an epsilon. Do you see that, what I'm talking about? It's faint, but underneath the name of the prophet up there is something. I think it's an epsilon, which just means this is the 5th book of the minor prophets. All right. Okay, let's see what happens when we click the next slide. All right, so it's the same sort of thing here in the other 4th century manuscript, Vaticanus. Everything is a little darker, so that's nice. But we have Amos, okay, Amos, and then we have our beta here to say it's the 2nd book in the sequence of the minor prophets. And then we have Micaias, and we have a gamma there at the very end. Where'd my clicker go? To signal that it's the 3rd. There's our gamma to signal that it's the 3rd book. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, and now, look, this is the end of the minor prophets in Vaticanus. And here we have Malachias, iota beta. Iota is 10, beta 2, so this is 12. Now we're done with the 12th book of the minor prophets. And then that starts Isaiah up there. So one of the interesting things is the minor prophets come before the major prophets in these ancient manuscripts. That was pretty common. So that's interesting. But do you see something else? If you go back to the previous slide, if you can. So this is the same manuscript, Amos to Micah. Okay, now go to the next one. And now we've got Malachi to Isaiah. Look, I mean, it looks to me like the Greek manuscript is treating the transition from Amos to Micah just like this. I mean, it looks exactly the same to me. I don't know if y'all would say that, but it looks, in other words, even though it's called the Book of the 12, the Greek manuscript is actually treating it as if it is a separate book. Y'all see that? Which is different from the Masoretic manuscript, which treated it like some intermediate kind of transition. This manuscript, it's called the Book of the 12, but it's actually treating it like it's a separate book in the transition. Okay, go to the next and let's, oh man, there's so much to talk about. Okay, keep going. Yeah, the name of God, interesting stuff. But we'll go on, we'll move on. Dead Sea Scrolls, yeah, let's take a look. We've got a few scrolls, yeah, keep going. All right, so we're gonna quickly look at, and we gotta do it quickly, each one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's only about 9, well, there's a few more than that, but there's not a whole lot of Dead Sea Scrolls to look at. So these are manuscripts of the Minor Prophets from the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right, you all are probably aware of this, some of the Dead Sea Scrolls are impressive specimens of biblical books. The Great Isaiah Scroll. That is unusual. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are very fragmentary, and when we come to the Minor Prophets, that is the case. So I'm assuming for you, most of these are going to be pretty unimpressive. Like, oh, that's it? Yeah, that's it. So, I mean, not that, so like what is on the screen is not the entirety, but I think I do have the entire thing. But in the next slides, yeah, so the entire preserved scroll on 3 sides. So look, there's part of it. Go to the next just to get a sense of what it looks like. So there's another one, and then the next one. So now you have seen the entirety of this particular Dead Sea Scroll, which is called 4Q12A. 12 for 12 Minor Prophets, 4Q12A. Okay, so we've seen it. Let's go back to the first slide of that scroll. Yeah, one more back. Okay, look. Okay, here is, so it's mid-2nd century BC. That's important. But look here. What do we actually have? We have a fragment that some people have identified as Zechariah, but I've got a question mark there because other people are like, what, Zechariah? I don't think that's what that is. I don't know what it is, but it ain't Zechariah. You know, because it's like, you know, I think it's that fragment up there at the top right, and they're like, is that Zechariah? What do y'all think? Is that Zechariah? What, y'all have about as good of a shot? Yeah, it is. Okay, we're making identifications. All right. And then, but what we do know that we have from this scroll is a bit of Malachi and a bit of Jonah. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? Because the way the official publication came down is that we have Zechariah, Malachi. That makes sense, even though now we're like, I'm not sure Zechariah is really a part of that. So we have Malachi and then Jonah. Huh. I think it is correct. I mean, from what I've read, I'm not doing scroll reconstructions in my office or anything. Okay, so I'm relying on scholarship on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I think from what I've read that it is correct to say, oh, well, we can see it actually. I don't even have to convince you of this. Let's go to the next and let's see if we have it there. No, go to the next. Yeah, here it is. Look. This right here is the end of Malachi. All right, this right here. Remember, you got to read right to left. Look over here. I don't know what that is, but it is something. You see that? So we've got the end of Malachi right here, and then something comes after that. Now, the original identification was, well, that's going to be a piece of Jonah. What I have read is, I don't think that's a piece of Jonah. I think Jonah, that scholars are saying, Jonah comes actually later in the manuscript and there's something else. So it's actually Malachi, something that we don't know, and then Jonah comes after that. Well, that's interesting. What we know for sure is that Malachi was not the end of this scroll, right? Because you can see it. You can see the letters right there. There's something there, even if we can't make out what word it was, right? So, interesting. Now, one thing we do know from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we don't have any Dead Sea Scrolls of the minor prophets that have all 12 of them on the same scroll preserved for us. Okay? We have, of the 8 minor prophets scroll, 8 scrolls with minor prophets on the scroll preserved. We have one of them that has 10 of the 12. And did it originally contain all 12? I mean, probably. Okay. Some others, like this one preserved, there are 2, Malachi and Jonah. And then apparently something in between them, but we don't know what that is. Now, of all the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have for the minor prophets, we don't have any that have a book of the minor prophets with something that's not a book of the minor prophets. Are you following me? Okay, so did the Dead Sea Scrolls, do they show us that the Qumran community thought of this as that it's a book of the 12? The evidence is, it would be hard to make that argument at this point. It would be hard to make the argument that the Qumran community thought of, it's not Hosea by itself, it's the book of the 12. And it always needs to go Hosea to Malachi. And it's this one book that's put together on purpose for us. It would be hard to make that argument from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Y'all see what I'm saying? Okay. Now, having said that, it looks like they always thought that these prophets belong together, or at least they don't belong with other things. You know, so you're not going to have a scroll of Isaiah and Malachi together, or Malachi and Samuel, or Psalms and Amos. You know, it looks, the minor prophets, they sort of belong together, but we might have a scroll of Jonah by itself, or we might have a scroll of Amos by itself, or some group, like whatever this is, maybe Malachi and Jonah and something in between them. I don't know. We could take guesses at what that something is, but it's probably one of the minor prophets. You know, so I don't know. You can think about the minor prophets. Whatever you think, I'm sure is right. All right, so the Dead Sea Scrolls sort of complicate this. At some point, the minor prophets were thought of as the book of the 12 that always go together, always in one sequence, Hosea to Malachi. But I'm not sure the Dead Sea Scrolls show us that had happened already. Maybe. We do have that one scroll, and go to the next slide, and we'll go ahead and just keep clicking. And okay, there's the end of, that's Malachi. That's a closer of the same thing that I've already shown you. Malachi with something at the end of it. You can see the something over there at the far left, okay? We've already looked at that. Okay, keep going. So this is the next scroll. This is the entire preserved scroll, okay? So pretty unimpressive, but it is Zephaniah and Haggai, and you do have the preserved join. So here it is. On this scroll, you've got the very end of Zephaniah and then the very beginning of Haggai. So that's cool that we have a scroll that preserves that join between the books. Okay, keep going. There it is again. Yeah, I've got a better picture of it. Okay, keep going. Here's the next scroll. And so we have Hosea, Joel, Amos, Zephaniah, and Malachi all here on this scroll. Keep going. So we'll see images of the entire scroll. Go to the next one, and that's it. And I've circled this one fragment that scholars now say that doesn't belong to this scroll. So in case you were wondering, that fragment goes with something else. Okay, keep going. Yeah, we'll skip all this. Okay, this is the whole scroll for this one, this 4Q12D. It's got a little bit of Hosea on it. Okay, keep going. 4Q12E, this has the entire preserved scroll, I think. Haggai and Zechariah on that one. Keep going. Entire preserved scroll. What have we got? Jonah and Micah on this scroll. All right, keep going. And now, yeah, this is the biggest of the scroll. This is the one with the 10 biblical books on it. So many images I couldn't, it's just too many, way too many. So this just gives you a taste. They're all really small. There's no big impressive image. Big impressive fragment from this scroll. All the fragments we have are pretty tiny, but apparently scholars think they all come from the same scroll. And this is the one with 10 books preserved. Okay, keep going. And then we've got this entire preserved scroll. It's just Amos. Keep going. Okay, keep going. Wadi Mudraba'at. Yeah, go to the next one. Let's see what we got. Well, Wadi Mudraba'at is another place. It's in the Dead Sea. There is a scroll from here that has the text of the entire Minor Prophets. Go to the next one and we'll see it. And so this has, again, almost all of the Minor Prophets. And it is a pretty big, impressive scroll. It's from, you see, about 135 CE AD. So it's in the 2nd century AD is when so it's a little bit later than the Dead Sea Scrolls. But it shows us, what it shows us is that what we have in the Masoretic text it's already there in the 2nd century AD. The wording, the order of the books, all that is there. Okay, so yeah, okay, we'll keep going. Yeah, do the whole thing. Okay, there it is. So what do we actually have in terms of sequences of the Minor Prophets? We've already talked about how there's a Masoretic text sequence, which is the one we're familiar with. And then there's a Septuagint sequence, which is a little bit different. And then we have, there's a book, y'all have probably heard of this book, right? The Martyrdom and Ascension of Isaiah, which is this ancient pseudepigraphon. And it has a different order as well. And then there's another book called The Lives of the Prophets, which has a slightly different order. And then we've already seen the last one there, 4Q12A, which is the one that has Jonah after Malachi, and maybe something comes in between them. So that's a different order as well. So even if we want to say, and I think we can probably stop it there, so thanks. Thank you for your finger. Even if we want to say that going back, let's push it as far, to the early 2nd century BC, let's say, maybe there was a standardized collection of Minor Prophets going back to that time. And let's just imagine, because we have Sirach 49:10. Y'all remember that text? That said, the bones of the 12 prophets. Sirach does not tell us, and by the way, Hosea's first, Malachi's at the end. It goes Hosea, Joel, Amos. He doesn't tell us the order, the sequence. Let's just say he had that. Let's say the sequence we know from the Masoretic text goes back to Sirach. And that it was sort of the standard, recognized, scholarly, priestly text of the Minor Prophets. It looks like then, if that's the case, there is also this freedom that other people felt in, let's rearrange that a little bit. The Septuagint translator, let's say, oh, let's group these 8th century prophets together. Or, the 4Q12a. Let's put Jonah after Malachi. Or let's rearrange it or whether the martyrdom of Ascension Isaiah and the lives of the prophets, if they're attesting these alternative orders, it looks like they didn't particularly have a problem doing that. They didn't feel like this was violating something that was sacred. I'm assuming. All right. So that's, I hope you thought that was helpful. That's the evidence. We can still talk about, I said I was going to talk about catchwords, but didn't I? Yeah, I think that's here. So let me try to, I don't know, wrap some things up. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but throw out some more stuff. Let's see. Let me see if I can find those catchwords. Okay, and I don't know if I can really well, I'm sure I can't do this justice. But this will get, I've already thrown out the most impressive of them is the end of Joel and the beginning of Hosea. I'm telling you that is the most impressive of them, which means the other ones I'm going to tell you about are less impressive. All right. You're going to think, if you haven't already done this in your reading, you're going to think, is that really all that important? The fact that Hosea ends this way and Joel begins that way, was that intended or is it just a coincidence? So the end of Hosea and the beginning of Joel, you have like 3 words that are repeated, not necessarily right together, but grain, wine, and the vine. You can find those words, those concepts at the end of Hosea and at the beginning of Joel. All right. I've done the Yahweh roars from Zion. That's the end of Amos and the end of Joel and the beginning of Amos. The end of Amos and then Obadiah. Y'all know what Obadiah is about? It's a prophecy against Edom. And at the very end of Amos, which is right before it, you've got the Israel, is it Israel or Judah, will possess Edom. So Edom is mentioned that's Amos 9 verse 12. So you got Edom right next to Edom. Okay. Obadiah and Jonah. So Obadiah comes right before Jonah. If we need to explain that, what would we reach for? They're both prophecies against foreign nations. Yeah? How's that? Y'all think that one's good? All right, let's go with that. All right. I am signaling, of course, that I think this is, it gets a little, I'm not sure if that's all that impressive. Let's see, Jonah and Micah, you've got the so-called creed, the Yahweh creed. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Moses on the mountain. I'll put my hand in front of you, you can see my back. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Exodus 34, and what does God say? Yahweh, Yahweh, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, all that. Okay, just look for it in Exodus 34, and then you'll see those concepts repeated throughout the Old Testament, but especially in the minor prophets they come up. And so Jonah and Micah both have that. Remember, Jonah's complaining about it in Jonah chapter 4, verse 2. I gotta get... all right, so I've got more. All right. There are others as well. Let me put a pause in that and try to wrap up just a little bit. And just think about the process of reading. All right. Is it proper? Is it okay? Is it okay to read, Romans chapter 1 without the context of Romans chapters 2 to 16? Can you just read Romans 1 sort of by itself without thinking about what? No, I think that's not a good thing to do. All right, you're going to be that's no good. Don't do that. if you're going to read Romans 1, read it in the context of Romans 1 through 16. If you read Psalm 1, do you need to read it in the context of Psalms 1 through 150? There's a little, what would that mean to read it in the context of Psalms 1 through 150? Let me ask you this. Do you think that Psalm 1 was put in place as the beginning of the Psalter intentionally? I do too. I do too. Should that influence the way we interpret Psalm 1? Probably. Probably. Now, do you think Psalm 37 was placed as Psalm 37 intentionally to come between Psalm 36 and Psalm 38? Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. That's harder. That's a harder case to make. I would need to be convinced of that. Should I read Psalm 37 without the context of Psalm 36 and Psalm 38? I think it's probably okay to do that. Yeah, I think it probably is okay to read it without that context. I think I should take a peek at Psalm 36 and see what happens if I read it in conversation with Psalm 37. Take a peek at Psalm 38 and sort of see. But look, Psalm 1 is a special case, I think. Maybe Psalm 2, maybe Psalm 150, maybe some other Psalms, I think Psalm 119, are placed in specific spots, it seems to me. Now, does this help us? It seems to me the book of Psalms and the book of the 12 are very similar in that. Like, at the end of the day, I think probably Hosea was put in place, at the beginning for a specific reason to introduce this idea of covenant faithfulness or something like this. And then it maybe influences the way we read the rest of them. However, covenant faithfulness is not unique to Hosea, right? So, like, if I read Joel in light of Hosea, I'm not sure that affects my reading so much more than simply reading Joel in light of the entire Mosaic covenant, or reading Joel in light of the entire Christian Bible. Maybe. I mean, if I read Psalm 1 as an introduction to the Psalter versus reading Psalm 1 simply as scripture, have I read it differently? I don't know, maybe. Maybe think about that and see what happens when you try that. If I read Joel, okay, I think you've got it. I find it a little confusing. Let me give a last thing, and I've got 2 minutes before Dwayne starts, so I'm okay. One last thing. If we were going to look for ways of reading that might be influenced by this, what kinds of things might we look for? The thing that is always nominated is the concept of the day of the Lord. All right, which is, in fact, brought up more often by the minor prophets than by anybody else. If you want to find the day of the Lord, look, you can find it in Isaiah 13, and you can find it, I think, in Ezekiel 13. But you're going to have better luck looking in the minor prophets, because you're going to find it really hammered in Joel and really hammered in Amos. And then there's Zephaniah, and I can't remember what all the minor prophets talk about the day of the Lord. It comes up again and again. And so if we want to think about reading the minor prophets as one book and see what would that do to us, try out the theme of the day of the Lord and just start in Hosea where it's actually not mentioned, and then go all the way through Malachi and see what happens. That is the one that gets nominated over and over again as the thing that you ought to look for. There are a few others as well, but that's the big one that I think is more obvious than any. I have taken up wisely all of my time. There are no time for questions. All right. Thank you for your attention.